Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this special panel discussion hosted by HBO Films and the University of Maryland Gildenhom Institute for Israel Studies about HBO's new diplomatic thriller, Oslo. My name is Steve Clemons. I'm editor-at-large at The Hill newspaper and moderator of today's panel. Oslo, produced by Mark Platt and Steven Spielberg, is based on the 2017 Tony Award winner for the best play about the secret back-channel talks, unlikely friendships, very interesting dessert menus and waffles, but we'll get to that later, and quiet heroics of a small but committed group of Israelis, Palestinians, and one Norwegian couple that led to the 1993 Oslo Accords. I kind of call this bank shot history. There are lots of moments where people want to earnestly accomplish things, but sometimes you need a bank shot, an unexpected moment, and that's what I feel this film represents. As you are all aware, this discussion comes at a time of crisis in Israel and Gaza, meaning we've got a ton of stuff to talk about today. Allow me first to introduce Professor Paul Sham, our co-host and the director of the Gildenhom Institute at the University of Maryland, where he teaches courses on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's the co-editor of the book Shared Histories, which explores the role of Israeli and Palestinian historical narratives in this conflict, and he's a co-director of the Israel Studies Review. He's also a great friend of mine. We've been talking about these issues close to 25 years. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Steve, for agreeing to moderate this very timely discussion. I appreciate all of you joining us. It speaks to the continuing importance of the conflict for so many of us. When we started planning this event a few weeks ago, we assumed it would be on the Oslo process and on the film. That's history, and it was fine with me. I'm a historian. Last week, of course, we recognized any discussion of the conflict must center on what's going on now. I wake up and go to sleep thinking about it. I'm sure many of you do as well. I see the relevance of Oslo today in two contrasting ways. First, the Oslo process has governed the definition and relationship of the parties from 1993 to today. This itself is a perversion. It was supposed to last 5 years, not 28. It was a process. Now it defines the status quo. Ironically, this film is being released just as I believe we are about to cast off the Oslo strictures, which have become shackles for the Palestinians. They no longer fit reality. It could have worked, it should have worked, but it didn't. My guess is the relationship will eventually evolve towards some sort of confederation, a further refinement of the two-state solution. However, historians, like most people, have a truly lousy track record at prophecy. In fact, the Talmud proclaims after the age of prophecy, its gift was given only to fools and little children. So be aware. Back to you, Steve.
said, our audience today includes nearly 200 scholars, students, and faculty members in the Association of Israel Studies, representing universities around the world. And I just have to say a comment here. I'm so happy that HBO is bringing the academic community in. This film is powerful, but it's also a provocation, and it needs informed debate and discussion. We're so pleased and honored you could join us. If you haven't seen the film by now, you'll be able to watch it via the same link you used to log on today until they're very precise with their time, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time tonight. So you can rush to it after this is over if you've got the time. The film will premiere on Saturday, May 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern. So you're among the very first people to see it. Obviously, the violence taking place in the Middle East right now is tragic, and we want to discuss it. But first, let's talk about Oslo, the movie, and let's begin with the trailer now.
Listen to me. This meeting is completely unofficial. You cannot even mention my ministry.
Trust me.
The Oslo Channel began with the hopes of creating a dialogue between the Palestinians and Israel.
If this fails, lives will be ruined.
Why would I accept your help? A discussion held somewhere isolated, where you and the PLO can meet.
I have never met an Israeli face to face.
In a secret Norwegian channel between Israel and the PLO.
You're a junior minister. Terry's just a sociologist.
You are my first Jew.
In my country, we see you as terrorists and murderers.
In my country, we see you as a savage nation whose army shoots our children for sport.
I can do business with this man.
The progress that was made in one two-day meeting, it's beyond imagination.
Their ways are strange, but through their methods, we have begun a true dialogue between our peoples.
Our countries live in the past, both obsessing over what we have lost. Let us find a way to live in the present.
Oh my God, they're laughing. If you take one more step, I swear I will divorce you.
It is illegal for an Israeli official to speak to the PLO.
If you continue down this path and the world finds out what you are all doing, there will be riots. Blood will be spilled.
Your fighting is killing your own children. Our fighting has forced you to tear with us.
You will accept this document that we've all agreed to when we are done.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to get into our panel discussion. Let me say first that those of you watching, if you'd like to pose a question, you can pose that question in chat, and we have a team behind the scenes who will send those to me, and I'll try and weave them through in our discussion. So don't wait till the end. Send them as you feel motivated by our discussion. Let me introduce our panelists. Greg KHALIL is the co-founder and president of Telos, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit that equips American leaders and their communities to better engage in seemingly intractable conflict. Nothing more appropriate than for today's discussion. Maybe we'll need an HBO film on Greg's work. Much of Telos' work is centered on the role of faith leaders and culture shapers in America's relationship to Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East. Prior to founding Telos, Greg was a legal and communications advisor to Palestinian leaders on peace negotiations with Israel. Gregory is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Then we have Yael Aronoff, is the director of the Michael and Elaine Serling Institute for Jewish Studies and Modern Israel, and the Serling Chair in Israel Studies at Michigan State University. She's also an associate professor of international relations at James Madison College. Dr. Aronoff serves as the president of the Association of Israel Studies. Her book, The Political Psychology of Israeli Prime Ministers, When Hardliners Opt for Peace, was published in 2014, and she co-edited another book called Continuity and Change in Political Culture, Israel and Beyond, published in November 2020. Scott LASENSKY, good friend, is a professor of Israel Studies at the University of Maryland. He served as senior policy advisor on Israel, the Middle East, and Jewish affairs in the Obama administration from 2011 to 2017. Working both in Washington Washington and Israel, Scott is the co-author of The Peace Puzzle, America's Quest for Arab-Israeli Peace, a must-read book, and also Negotiating Arab-Israeli Peace, American Leadership in the Middle East. And J.T. Rogers is the multiple award-winning playwright who wrote Oslo for the stage in Broadway. Fantastic stage elsewhere as well, but I saw it in Broadway. Subsequently, the film as well and the Broadway production won several awards, including the 2017 Tony Award for Best Play. But we begin with director Bartlett SHER, who directed this play as well, taking it around the world from New York to London to Tel Aviv. He's one of America's most admired and prolific theater directors and a Tony Award winner who has been nominated 9 times. Congratulations on the film and welcome to all of you. So let's start out. We're going to have, as I said a little bit earlier, a kind of format of The View, but talking about Oslo in this film, but also about the Israeli-Gaza condition and what's going on. So let me just start out, Bart, and say, how did you find your way into the scaffolding of this incredibly complex historic that no one seems to have been able to solve? But how did you find your way into this?
Well, it's a very strange but maybe appropriate story. My daughter's best friend in 2nd grade was named Emma Rod Larson, and she was the daughter of Taya Rod Larson and Mona Ewell. And I would go with them to soccer matches, and Taya would tell me the craziest stories about Middle East peace, which honestly occurred to me to be perfect for a piece of theater. And I introduced him to JT, and away they went and made a play. But it really came in a very New York
should tell
way.
the audience these are the 2 lead protagonists from Norway, right? That in this, yes. So you knew them personally. Were they as quirky in real life as they were on screen?
It's probably fair to say they weren't like the other parents at our school, and they were very unusual. And, you know, Taya is a very gregarious, outgoing, extraordinarily elegant man. Mona was an exceptional diplomat, still working at the UN, and they were just really fun to talk to. And we would spend a lot of time together with our kids, and yeah, they were extraordinary.
I want to bring JT into this in a moment, but I want to just basically say this is a film. I enjoyed the play, I saw it, but we have real lives being lost. We have over 200 people have been killed in Palestine right now. We have a kind of glaring, horrific situation occurring even as we're doing this show. What are your feelings about the contrast of that and what's going on? Because that will be part of the discussion when your show airs on the 29th. Bart?
Well, I mean, for us, it's been kind of a completely insane experience because it was one thing to get the film made in the middle of a pandemic and to go through all of that. But I will say that it's a terrible confluence of events because for all of us who've worked on the film, the emergence of the new conflict is very profound for all of us. But I do think we at least feel like we're serving the job of telling the story of history, so people can have some sense, like a great Shakespeare history play, of the actual events that happened. Yes, 27 years ago, but at least enough to give them some perspective, some context for where we are now and how different we are now, because we're not making any assumptions that what's going on today, even however, I'll leave up to the scholars to make the conclusions about how it's affecting us today.
Well, and JT, I should say thank you for joining us from Japan. Konbanwa, hajime mashite, yoroshiku, all that. So, but I would say, in the discussion as well of this moment and what you hoped to bring both to the stage and now to film, this has been, as I'm sure we're going to get in and discuss with our academic colleagues and those that have been involved in the negotiations, was hopeful, and then it was a sort of moment that seemed to get stuck. And how you see where we're at today. So, I'd love to get a sense of your feelings as an artist in the middle of this moment.
Well, yeah, I'll overlap as we often do with Bart's thoughts about it. As longtime collaborators, what drew me to the story in the first place was meeting Larson and hearing the barest of bones of what happened, and sort of thinking, your storyteller sense is, my gosh, that's the story that I want to tell. That's a story that has history and sweep and life and death stakes. But what also drew me to it, which I think sort of connects to what you're talking about in the sort of horrific events going on and the tragic events going on right now, is that this is a story about individuals who had the courage to sit across the table from their enemy and see their enemy, their dehumanized enemy, as human beings. And the paradox to me of that, and the profound truth of it, is those individuals, they were the ones who would change by seeing humanity in somebody that they did not before, and having the courage to do that. And that moved me terribly as a citizen, as an artist. And I thought, well, that's the kind of morally complicated story that I'm interested in telling. And so, you know, we, myself, Bart, everyone involved, the actors involved, we're artists. Our job is to raise difficult questions, and not, you know, when you tell a story, if I knew all the answers and I knew an A equals B and B equals C, then of course that's what it should be. Then that isn't the story you tell as a playwright or a screenwriter. You tell a story that goes, I'm so moved by this. I'm so fascinated. I don't really understand. What would I do in those shoes? Gee, I don't know. That's the story that I want to tell. And you try, at least I try to tell stories of this one, maybe more than any I've written, where you're trying to expand the humanity of who gets to be on screen, who gets to be on stage, and how they're seen by the general public.
Before I bring in our other panel members, let me ask, you know, Bart and JT, you know, you had Palestinian and Israeli actors in this, and, you know, they have had the shared experience of this in real life. Is there anything you can share with me and share with us about what that was like for them in terms of making sure they were, not only making sure they were part of it, but I mean, did it add, how did they process, you know, when they were acting and participating in something where you were trying to have impact, when in fact, you know, they know the tension between Oslo and what we see today on the ground?
Well, I would, what I found most interesting, I mean, it probably is more about the theater than it was about Israel and Palestine, because these actors all know each other, have all worked with each other for years. They all are very comfortable in close contact over the work we do together. And they all seem to share a very similar perspective on the events of Oslo and on the struggle that's going on now. I think what's been most telling is in most recent days, in the last 2 weeks, it's had the biggest impact as we're checking in with them and seeing how they're doing. It's really taken a toll on all of our actors to see this struggle come. I mean, they believe a lot in our film, but it's had a huge impact on them with each other and how they support each other and how much this means to them as artists and as citizens and as people who live in that region. That part has been very moving and very, it gives one a lot of pause and a lot of perspective.
JT, any quick thoughts?
No, I mean, it was very moving, just as Bart said, but to see, you know, these are artists and they're Palestinians and Israelis, and but not only do they know each other, but it's similar to what the story is about, is that their job, their lifeblood is to, what is it like to be the other? What is it like to put yourself in the shoes of the other?
Well, let me bring Scott and Yael and Gregory into this discussion, but I want to start with Scott and reflect for a moment. When we first met, and I was at the New America Foundation, and Barack Obama had come in, we had organized our think tank around that time. We had our own think tank saying, you know, there are three needles that can be moved in the world. There's Iran negotiations, there's Cuba and normalizing Cuba, and there's Israel-Palestine. And we had encouraged from our little soapbox the president to consider doing Cuba first, as it would send a signal to the world, but probably be easiest. Doing Iran next, because there were certain dynamics in play, and Israel-Palestine third. And he did them exactly kind of opposite. And it was the sense that you needed momentum. And so my question to you is, after having been in that mix of the Obama administration, where by the last 2 years of the administration, he didn't even want to mention Israel-Palestine, what went wrong, and what reflections do you have for the Biden administration in this time about priority and success and making something real and not fake in terms of dashed expectations, which I would love to get into with everyone. But let's start with Scott, and everyone feel free to jump in. But Scott?
Thanks, Steve. You're right. President Obama dove in. I think he was still groggy, probably from the inaugural balls the first morning in the Oval. I'm working on a book about this now. He placed 4 calls to Arab and Israeli leaders first morning, day after the inauguration. The next day, went to the State Department, appointed George Mitchell as his special envoy. And you're right. By the last 2 years, a lot had changed. Number one, our policies had run aground. I think it's fair to say we made a lot of mistakes along the way in how we conducted our diplomacy and how we identified what the goals should be. We had trouble understanding conflict dynamics. Barack Obama comes to office at a time when American diplomats weren't even traveling to Gaza. Mm-hmm. About a week before his inauguration, a renegade senator, he later comes back into view in the second term, John Kerry, he decides to defy the ban on travel, and he travels to Gaza at the very end of the first Gaza-Israel war. He felt it's imperative to bear witness. There had been an attack on American diplomats 5 years prior. American diplomats haven't set foot in Gaza for almost 20 years. So we were flying blind a little bit. The concepts and the constructs of our diplomacy had a lot of faults. Over those 8 years, I think you could also argue the president changed his priorities because the strategic array of what the U.S. was facing in the Middle East changed a bit. It's tragic for Israelis and Palestinians, but the strategic, the assessment of where this fit into American interests started to go down over those 8 years. I think it's coming back into view. One of President Obama's core assumptions that this conflict is interconnected and is linked to dynamics all around the Middle East, which some on the conservative side and on the far right decry somehow, the question of linkage. I think that this conflict today, this week, last week, is bringing that back into view, that the conflict is deeply interconnected. Huge stakes for people on the ground, but also interconnected.
Real quick, why did Oslo become the high bar for us and rather than the low bar on which further progress? What were the ingredients that led to going nowhere past Oslo?
So it's a great question. Nobody debates that Oslo failed. It's not the movie and not that moment, but the process. The process that it launched failed spectacularly. There's a quote in the trailer and in the film: "Blood will be spilled, lives will be ruined." Sure, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives were affected very negatively. The human toll. So there's no question that the Oslo process, bold experiment, the boldest in a century of this conflict, failed. But why did it fail? It's still 20 years later, almost since the collapse of Oslo, and there's still a debate. Is it the leaders? Were it the extremists that tore it down? Did the third parties? Did the U.S.? We weren't there eating the waffles, as you saw in the movie. We weren't in Norway. We were brought in at the end to underwrite the deal, to pay for it, to bring in the international backing, to bring in some of the neighbors. We were brought in at the end. It wasn't our formula. Was it us? Or was it a combination of all those things? Failed leaders, extremists, poor diplomacy from the outside. And can we draw those lessons? I very much hope. I worked with a lot of people who are now on the team working for President Biden. I hope they draw the appropriate lessons from our failed attempts. America's been greatly successful, not during the Oslo years, but in the 70s and the 80s, Henry Kissinger, Democrats and Republicans, Jimmy Carter. We've had high points of American diplomacy where we have bridged the divide. Israel, Egypt, Israel, Jordan. We have made some monumental mistakes in the Israeli-Palestinian sphere. It's important we learn from our mistakes and we learn from our successes, and we try to do better going forward.
Thank you, Gregory. Let me jump to you. You were in the negotiation support unit. You were on the you were essentially one of the actors that came, well, not of this film, but an actors in the real life scene of negotiating these dimensions. And I guess my question to you is on the ground. And I realize, one of the things I found fascinating about the film, and we'll get back to JT and Bart, is that you saw fun personalities, but people had to play their roles. What is it? And one of the things I did like about the movie very much is that they talked about the formality of negotiations, the structured dance that they had to go through was never going to achieve a result. And so something different, a different dance was needed. And I guess my question to you as a negotiating unit person who knows all sides of this intimately, let me ask you, why did Oslo become the high bar, and why do facts on the ground? Why was the shelf life of this so extraordinarily long when it shouldn't have been?
I mean, there's a lot in that question. And Steve, I want to get to what's happening today very quickly.
Sure.
But I think there are many flaws in the Oslo process that we could debate, and many wonderful things. I think, I'm a huge critic of Oslo. I think the process is dead, but I think the core intentions that we saw were correct. Many of us tend to forget that, there's two unequal parties here, but there's got to be some negotiation process to get out. Now, the roles that you saw depicted in the film, that's true. Like every human endeavor, it's human beings. People know each other. The stories that I could tell and some that I might are, extraordinary and unexpected, just as the stories in this film. But one of the major flaws in the Oslo process was that it got too caught up in itself. It ignored the fundamental realities on the ground. The first principle of realpolitik, of diplomacy, is to see the world as it is, not to project onto it. And so there's just one example of that. And I'm the only Palestinian on here of 7 speakers, but I run an organization that's pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian. I'm speaking in my personal capacity now. But the key example of that, just on the ground, 1993, Declaration of Principles signed, supposed to be concluded by 1999. In that period, you started with 90,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank, tripled to 270,000. And the negotiators' joke was, okay, we're talking about dividing up this pizza, right? But how can we reasonably create a process around dividing up the pizza when you're still eating it? And so the fundamental reality on the ground that we ignored then and that we have to contend to today, no matter our politics, no matter our allegiance, is that there's one party that controls everything ultimately within Israel-Palestine. That's Israel, Gaza Strip, yes, the Gaza Strip, and we can get into that, Jerusalem, and the West Bank. That's Israel. I experienced that firsthand on the negotiating team when all of my movements, my daily life, my person were constantly at threat, along with everybody else on my team in very extreme ways. That party, despite the Palestinian Authority, that party has ultimate control. And you have a two-tiered system. That two-tiered system, it's a simple reality that gets obfuscated. How we got there and why, that's complicated. How we get out of this is complicated, but we need to begin, for any future process to begin, we need to see the world as it is. And there's a problem. Doesn't mean you're anti-Israel, to recognize that there's this situation where one people controls another, and that's never going to lead anywhere good. This is a human rights situation, not a political debate.
Before I jump to Yael, Gregory, it's very powerful what you said. Do you believe that Israel is a key stakeholder in this situation, is still eating that pizza, or do you think there's a chance of pausing?
Oh, it's kept eating that pizza right through Democratic, Republican administrations, through, Shimon Peres, depicted in the film, who's somebody whom I knew, is one who really gave the settlement movement its first sort of political movement. So this was, left and right-wing governments in Israel too. And when you come down to Jerusalem today, you mentioned Israel-Gaza, but remember, this started in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is a lot like Vegas and a lot different, because what happens in Jerusalem doesn't stay in Jerusalem. And this was a debate about settlement. You'll hear this thing about, this was a real estate dispute in Sheikh Jarrah that sparked out of control, and Palestinians were stockpiling stones and stuff. And there's a lot of complexity and truth in that. But the families, the forced removals of families from Sheikh Jarrah that was heating up right now, two things. One, you've had settlers marching for weeks chanting death to Arabs with the protection of the Israeli police. And yeah, there is a dispute over the property. But the reason why that dispute exists is because of an Israeli law that allows Jews, and only Jews, not Palestinians, to reclaim property from before 1948, the year that Israel was founded. And so when we talk about something like that as a property dispute, when only certain people are allowed to go to the courts and the law only favors certain people, we're obscuring this fundamental reality that one group of people has the rights and the other don't. And this doesn't lead anywhere. Even Jabotinsky, the famous leader of the early sort of more right-wing Zionist movement, wrote that essay, The Iron Wall, recognizing that nobody would want to be ruled by another people indefinitely. And now also we had hope of ending this situation. Now there is no hope. There is nothing on the horizon. It's permanent, and we need to name that.
I really want to say thank you, Gregory, for sharing your view and also bringing your. I don't think we'd have this conversation if we didn't have. I mean, I think that's part of both the film, but a part of this discussion today. And I know, Yael, your Association of Israel Studies is also one that looks at Israel about all the people in there, Palestinians, Israelis, and others, in distinct side of this. But I would ask you, as one of the foremost experts on Oslo, on looking at strengths and I won't call them weaknesses, but challenges. What do you think we can learn from the Oslo process and the Oslo Accord?
Well, we all are here with heavy hearts today for all the Palestinians and Israelis who are suffering and dying as we speak, and we pray for an immediate ceasefire. At least I do. I certainly am not speaking for the Association of Israel Studies, in which there are hundreds of different points of view and scholarship on this. So just for myself. And I'm almost in complete agreement with Scott and Greg and almost everything that they said. So I think that there's a lot of agreement among us. I think that there are some flaws that were brought up that are there, and that includes what Greg mentioned about the settlements. And one of the flaws of the Oslo Accords, of course, is that there was no mention of the settlements. And Yossi Beilin, in this chapter in the book that I edited that you mentioned that just came out, he said that one beautiful thing about the film is that it shows the trust that was built, right? And that was just growing among the actors who then end up going to each other's kids' weddings and form friendships and so forth. And Beilin was saying there's almost too much trust, in the sense that they trusted that Rabin would not continue building settlements, and then he was assassinated, and then there was nothing in the agreement, right? So that was one of the flaws. Another, of course, that we all know about is that it was supposed to be a gradual process, precisely in order to build trust among the parties. And as we all could see, the spoilers on both sides managed to really play a damaging role in eroding trust rather than building that trust up. And there are so many things that have changed, both positively in terms of progress in peace negotiations and negatively in terms of continued settlements and Hamas control and gathering rockets and so forth. But there are also parallels to today in terms of the spoilers then and the spoilers today, and the actors then and the actors today, right? If you look at right after the Rabin assassination, it was Hamas that played a huge role in continual suicide bombings and upping those suicide bombings right before the Israeli election, precisely in order to get Benjamin Netanyahu elected in 1996, and he won by a hair, partially because of those attacks in the 2 weeks preceding that. And he proceeded to really play a role in derailing that process and not kind of, following through on the commitments that Israel had. And then, of course, both sides stopped following those commitments. And if you look at it today, again, and you had the Jewish extremists who then, proceeded with settlements. And then today, what you have is those extremists who are behind evicting families in Sheikh Jarrah and things of that sort on one end. And then you have Hamas on the other side, again, keeping Netanyahu in power, right? So both actors, in a sense, influence who their partner or lack of partner is going to be. And in a sense, it's kind of Netanyahu and Hamas who kind of enable each other's increased empowerment. So you have these unfortunate, parallels today. But what I would like to say as well is that even though people treat Oslo as a failure, and in many, many ways it certainly failed for us to reach a peace agreement, but I want to echo a little bit what I think Greg was saying too, the spirit of Oslo, or the spirit of the need to come to a political solution and recognize each other, negotiate each other. And I still think the plurality of Israelis and Palestinians throughout these past 28 years of hopelessness and diminished hope, continue a plurality of them to believe in the two-state framework that essentially Oslo breathed life to and brought the framework in. And that framework is still the most legitimate framework among a plurality of the populations on the ground, among the UN, the EU, the United States, Russia, and the Arab League. So in that sense, Oslo is not dead, but the spirit of Oslo is needed more than ever today when we have people dying on the ground every day. And in the midst of this hopelessness, we need to remember That needs to be the goal. Before Oslo, no one thought it could happen. So I think that hope needs to be rekindled, and so much needs to be done on the ground in order to build some confidence and do with some of the things that Greg and Scott alluded to that need to be done.
Right. Thank you. That let me just open up to Bart and JT for a moment and ask you, one of the kind of the feelings of what you did in the film is while this little side deal with Waffles was being cooked up and you had the drama going on, in the film, I hope I'm not giving away too much, you felt as if this was the fault line, one of the fault line moments for the world, saving from a big earthquake, that the keeping the American, all the drama, Shimon Peres talking to Arafat, all of that felt as if you were on a geostrategic fault line of enormous consequence. Today, I don't know if it is. When you've got the Abraham Accords, you've got normalization with various Arab states. I know it's a moral story, but I don't know if it's the same geostrategic story. And I'd love to hear from both of you, because you've taken this play to Tel Aviv, to London, to New York, other places in the world. How have your audience seen it? Is it a moral story, or is it a strategically significant story? JT?
I think it's a story. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm pausing because the story. What's interesting is that you start. There's the Fitzgerald maxim: if you start with the universal, you end with nothing. But if you start with the specific, you end with the universal. So now I'm simply talking about how this story is accepted or absorbed by people. Right. When we did this play originally in New York, it was the response was very positive from Israeli and Palestinian American citizens, but the public at large. But what was fascinating was when you write a story like this, you draw brackets and you say, I'm not a historian, I'm not a politician, I'm not going to make comments about what happened before or after. I'm trying to tell a story in the most deeply human way with sort of almost self-proclaimed blinders. And yet when the show is put out into the public, the response of the United States at the time in 2016, 17, when it came out was, oh my goodness, look at this parable for Donald Trump. And when the show opened in the West End, it was assumed in the British press, well, this is almost an on-the-nose parable for Brexit. We're having a cultural civil war, and obviously this is a story about enemies getting, and so obviously that was not in any intention on my part. And I think I say that because I think that if the play works, if the film works, and other people will decide that in their own response to it, it is our attempt to tell a story in a particular moment, in a particular time, with particular individuals that are trying to find a way to cross what is seen as an intractable divide. To, as someone says in film, to be the first people to reach a boat to the other shore, and trying to convey what that was like, what the human risk of that was, and how on a human scale, is the character of Abu Allah says in the film, based on his own memoirs, I took this idea, was his fear of sitting in a room meeting these gentlemen and having never even met an Israeli before in his life, and how terrified he was to even do that. A man of his formidable, I said, well, that's what I want to tell a story about, someone who would take that risk.
Right. Bart, your thoughts, and then I'll jump to Scott.
First of all, I'm deeply humbled to be on a panel with extraordinary scholars who know 5,000 times more about this subject than I do. And to identify that what an artist does is create circumstances in which people overcome obstacles and cross boundaries and do incredible things, which doesn't always bear completely in reality, and create an opportunity for people to experience some of the emotional impact of what happens when these forces come together. So it's a little tricky because there's never been our intention to endorse Oslo or do any of that, but actually it has a secondary effect of at least giving people who know absolutely nothing about the region some information and some voice for both Palestinians and Israelis at a certain period. And that's what we can provide. But mostly what we do is create the circumstances in which, people under very, very intense circumstances overcome obstacles. And we tell stories in that way. And that's secondary to actual policy or the very, very profound and truthful and extraordinary things each one of you said about the actual circumstances of Oslo and the terrible circumstances we're facing today.
Thank you for that, Scott, and Greg and Yael. I interviewed Senator Chris Murphy yesterday. I actually mentioned this film, but the time, and I asked him, does America have the tools in the toolkit anymore, and does it care? I mean, Barack Obama cared, but I'm not sure we have the leverage points, or there may be ways for some of the protagonists in this, particularly Israel vis-a-vis Congress or something, to look at. I mean, maybe the Republicans come back in 18 months, and this story just continues. So I'm interested in tools in our quiver on whether that exists today to make a difference, or whether we're deluding ourselves, at least in the U.S. case, that we matter, and maybe we don't. Maybe there needs to be other players. But if you were to change the game board of what to do, and I would ask this of all three of you, what would you change? I mean, maybe the U.S. should withdraw and let other players put in. What is your thoughts, Scott?
Steve, I always love being with you. You bring the conversation to great places. Let me speak a bit about the sort of arc of American involvement and then something about today. The arc is at a high point in the Cold War in the 70s, and then at the end of the Cold War, when the U.S. was trying to reshape a new world order in the early 90s, we got deeply involved. We got deeply involved because all of American global interests in the Middle East with great powers, it pulled us into this conflict. We weren't always an ally of Israel. We didn't always give Israel and its neighbors a lot of foreign assistance. It's actually relatively new. My students are often surprised to hear that. We got in for strategic issues that have receded a little bit, but we're still there.
Right.
Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and now the Palestinians, with the assistance restored by President Biden, are top aid recipients globally. We have a lot of influence. We have a lot of leverage. The compelling reason to be involved is hard to define. It's hard to discern at a moment when there's concerns about climate change, there's concerns about rivalry with China. We're not waiting in line at the gas station because of an Arab oil embargo. It's the obvious strategic arguments aren't as easy to discern, and yet we're still deeply involved. We're entrenched and intermingled in these relationships between all of these parties, and we have a lot of influence. What are we going to do with that influence? And that kind of is the pivot to today. We need to bring new tools to the table. We not only have to, I'll say one thing in response to what Greg said, and then give you one idea about something new to try, and then turn it to others. We don't just have to provide side payments, which was part of the magic with Israel and Egypt, and Israel and Jordan finding ways, money, security guarantees to give each side what they couldn't get from the other. We were like the master at side payments and transactions. We need to restore some balance. It's a relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, deeply unbalanced, as Greg said. A lot of asymmetries. In my book, Negotiating Arab-Israeli Peace, my co-author and I, we talk about America won't succeed unless we can address those imbalances. Palestinians need protection, for example. Israelis need their security, and we're a big part of helping them maintain their security, but Palestinians need protection. Part of the fabric that's been pulled down today is not just across that border between Gaza and Israel, but it's within Israel. I promised Yael I wouldn't pull out for show and tell, but over my shoulder, there's a picture I'll send it to all of you after, of Barack Obama and two 9th grade girls, one Jewish, one Arab, one Palestinian, one Israeli. He brought them to the White House. They held hands. They lit a Hanukkah menorah. They lit Hanukkah candles together. It was a high wattage spotlight on a single school where Jews and Arabs studied together in Jerusalem, an extraordinary place, bilingual. It had just been attacked by racist extremists who opposed Jews and Arabs intermingling. We need to do like this image of Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, two 9th grade girls. We need to do it 1,000 times or 10,000 times over. People-to-people programs, peacemaking efforts. Actually, Nita Lowey, who just left the House, and a Republican colleague of hers left behind a new tool for the Biden administration. They're still setting it up, this partnership fund for peace. It's called $50 million, supercharging U.S. Efforts, grant-making, basically, to civil society NGOs. We need to do a lot of that work, much more than ever before, and address all these kind of built-in asymmetries if we're ever going to get the parties out of this terrible dynamic where they fight, there's a pause, and they fight again. And this investment, we put a huge investment in the United States in Arab-Israeli peace, and we're seeing it frittered away by a status quo that's deeply destabilizing. Anyway.
Thank you. Let me bring Gregory in. Gregory, if you were to change the game board, I mean, you are like somehow the protagonist in this film. You take intractable conflict and you find a way from that intractable conflict to something else. And so, if you were to have greater control, I want to be sensitive to the fact of talking about the world as it is, not as the world as you hope it might be. But given the world as it is on the ground, what would you put on the table to change the game board at least? I'm not obsessed. We have a lot of people from around the world, from academics watching this. I don't want to be narcissistic from an American perspective, but America is a major player in this. And sometimes I wonder, as the film did, whether we cause more trouble in the process than we should. And should there be oxygen for other players in this? But your thoughts on how you change the environment to get to something different today with regards to the crisis we see today?
I'm going to get there because there's so many different ways we could do that. But I want to start with your previous question about the American role. Look, you can make a geopolitical case for America's involvement, but the fundamental reason that America is involved and has been involved in recent decades is because Americans care. Israel-Palestine is a foreign policy issue, but it doesn't function like a foreign policy issue. So we don't have church picnics around North Korea's nuclear weapons, but we care. I mean, we do around Israel. To be like, elected a member of Congress, you have to have a position on this issue. This is one of those issues. So on domestic issues, cultures functions very much upstream from politics. And why this is relevant, I'm not one for U.S. Americans, indefinite empire throughout the world. I think that's a complex question. But the reason why we need to be involved differently is because we are involved, and we're involved in a way that's harmful. $3.8 billion a year to Israel, hundreds of millions of dollars now again to the Palestinians, plus all the diplomatic action. Right now, Gregory Meeks in Congress is putting forward again this bill to approve $765 million in new military aid to Israel during this period. I know that was in the works before that, but it's not a question of whether involved, but how. And so the U.S. needs to change. How do we change that? Well, on the ground here, on the ground there, Scott hinted at sort of, these new types of movements. I think that's what we need. We need to forget about romanticizing and fetishizing negotiations. There will be a day when that is probable. But one of the reasons why the negotiations failed is what's more important in negotiations is what's happening outside of the negotiations room than inside. So those who haven't worked in negotiations, you all have friends who've gotten divorced. You've seen the messy divorce. You've seen when parties want it, they find a way. Now, on this issue, you have all of these external actors, Arab, Palestinian, Israeli, European, American, who are trying to influence the dynamic in very different ways. But in this current moment, we have a failure of leadership and a failure of political process. So the big win, the very big win in this moment, and there is one, and I have one other thing to say, sorry, Steve, but I'm going to go on. The big win is to shift this to view it through a human rights lens for both Palestinians and ultimately Israelis. I mean, Hamas's indiscriminate bombing of Israelis, you can do all you want to explain that, but that's a war crime. Just as the continued decades-long occupation and control of Palestinians, whether they're in Israel, Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, is also a war crime. And you can read Human Rights Watch's Beit-Salem's new reports. Last point here is on artists. I think artists have such a critical role to play. I took Colin McCann, who wrote the book A Paragon, which tells the story of the Parents Circle. There's so many Israelis and Palestinians doing this cross-border work in very dangerous embodied ways for decades. There's one artist I think that I'd love for all of you to know, Mohammed Al-Kurd, Sheikh Jarrah. He's a subject of a film when he was 11 years old, My Neighborhood, about his house. He's now in his early 20s, a poet and an author. He's there every day on Instagram showing his experience live. Whatever your position is on this, and I know you're going to disagree with a lot of his politics, as I do personally, those are the voices we need to listen to. These are the folks on the ground. It's not going to be a boss who canceled, again, the first Palestinian elections in 16 years after 1 million people registered. So we've got to listen to new voices. They're out there. And the good news is they're amazing. And there's a new movement that's brewing that all of us can be a part of.
That is great. We're getting into the final stretch. Yael, I want to ask you the same question, but with a filter about leadership and leaders. And I just want to challenge you for a minute. One of the things about the film, which is interesting, is it took this Norwegian crazy couple that are friends of Bart You know, that they kind of did this, and they brought people in. But leaders in the story did come through and matter. But there's continually the frame, and again, just to provoke, that we can't, what Barack Obama says, we can't want peace more than they do. I'm a strategist and a realist, and I can basically say, yes, America or other nations or the quartet can want peace more than they do. They could have done much more to say, you know, your failure to achieve peace is imposing strategic costs on us that we're paying for as terrorists are exploiting the grievance as others. And you know, with respect to JTs in Japan right now, you know, we
tried that. That's Jim Baker, 1991-92.
Yeah, Jim Baker, but in Japan, you know, we used to do this. There's a Japanese word called gaiatsu, meaning international pressure. And the Japanese bureaucrats themselves used to invite American negotiators, please bash us on this issue, because they domestically, internally, could not get the politics right to do the liberalizations they needed. So they used gaiatsu. The Japanese used us to come in. So my question to you, Yael, is, do we need a gaiatsu, or do you think the leadership can ever be generated within? How's that for a question?
Like a true academic, I'll say yes and no, right? It's not one or the other. First of all, I don't think anyone really deeply yearns for peace more than Israelis and Palestinians do. And I don't think the Larsens did, and I don't think the EU does, and I don't think Americans does, much less the Japanese. There's no one that yearns for peace, for people who've not had a day of peace in their lives, or self-determination for both peoples in their lives, and freedom and being outside of occupation. No one wants that more than Israelis and Palestinians. It's just that there's a lot of distrust, and each side kind of distrusts the genuine intentions of the other side. And each side is willing to accommodate, sometimes in a surprising way, if they thought that they had a partner and was willing to accommodate. So I think the first thing that needs to happen, and one of the things that didn't happen in the Oslo process, is that the public, they kind of did it in isolation in Oslo, but there was no public education or public engagement. And what you have since is you have Israelis or the Israeli government appealing to the United States and the United States people in government. You have the Palestinians appealing to the UN and to the international community, but Israelis are not appealing to Palestinians, and Palestinians are not appealing to Israelis. Right, so the people they need to convince is not Japan and not the EU and not their Norwegians and not the US. Israelis need to convince Palestinians, right, of what they're willing to do and where their intentions are, and walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And similarly, Palestinians need to convince the Israeli public, not the EU. And so I don't think the parties at the end of the day have to be bashed on the head, right? If we look at even policy toward Iran, we think, oh my goodness, if we do more economic sanctions, will that embolden the hardliners in Iran, right? But then the same people say, bash the heads of the parties in order to get them to change their behavior. I do think that sometimes the parties definitely need to be pressured, but also both populations to different degrees and different ways are traumatized peoples. And what they also need is understanding and empathy. Right. And what they need is leadership. And I agree with you that on both sides right now, you have a very weak Israeli system that can't it seems incapable of dramatic foreign policy change. It has had 4 elections in 2 years. On the Palestinian side, you haven't had elections in forever, a very weak leader. And so they can't almost overcome their domestic constraints themselves, despite the people's desire for real peace. And that's why you need active mediation. Not when it's Trump, mind you, because I think he was very harmful, but there can be leaders, even though they made mistakes. There's a lot that Biden can do, starting with immediate ceasefire, and then other things that he can do once he puts an ambassador to Israel and other things. And there are things that Jordan and Egypt and now the UAE and others can do, and even the EU at times. They do need help, not because their lack of desire for peace, but because of the domestic constraints that they're under. And if we can all, in addition to pressure, show both parties a little more understanding and empathy, I think we can move them along in that direction through confidence building measures, but also pressure, as Greg says, for the stronger party to take more measures to alleviate that control and to start alleviating occupation.
Right. Yeah, Yael, that's wonderful. Thank you. We're just in the last 3 minutes and we have to stick to time, but I wanted to just ask each of you for a brief sliver just to, conclude this wonderful and interesting and provocative discussion. During the Clinton administration, when they were having defense drawdowns, and, I used to visit a bunch of nuclear weapons labs in New Mexico because I worked for the senator of New Mexico. And they said, we can't get enough budget from the government for war fighting anymore to maintain these. We have to use technologies we've developed in trust building. We have to look at a peace mission within this area. And it's always stuck with me that there was an actual budgetary choice between beginning to orient towards peace and trust building in countries versus war fighting and others inside a major, nuclear weapons laboratory. But I guess my final question to you, and it's been inspired by a question from the audience, is how can legitimacy be built in these environments around those who do want to negotiate peace, and the veto be taken away from some of the radicals in the process? And I would love to get 30-second responses. Let me start with Scott. Scott, is that possible? 30 seconds?
Sure. Number one, we should hold the parties to standards. It's very important. We've had a great track record bringing them together, but we don't have a great track record holding, whether it's anti-incitement, whether it's Israel on provocative moves, settlements, demolitions. We need to try to get the parties to restate commitments and then hold them to account. Second, I would agree with Greg. We got to get out of the room from behind the curtain and move into the civil society space and business leaders, faith leaders, and do a lot of work outside of formal negotiations. This particular conflict today will require. But I would just add also, it's
just real quick
for the U.S. We got to get eyes on the ground in Gaza. You have to. It's not just about bearing witness. It's about understanding the reality. Very important.
Thank you, Yael. Yael.
I agree with what everyone says. I mean, I hope for an immediate ceasefire. There needs to be kind of new leadership in all parties, and I think Biden can, if he pays more attention. I think needs to pay attention more to this to play a role, but others do as well. And I still am hopeful at the end of the day because I do believe that there are these partnerships between moderate Israelis and moderate Palestinians, and that the extremists on both sides from the beginnings of Oslo on have tried to undermine this. But I still believe in the majority, in a sense, in both populations. And I think that as soon as the war ends, it can turn to reconstruction of Gaza and other such, and lots of measures in Jerusalem and greater equality for all in Israel.
Thank you. Gregory?
Two things. One, share now. This is a long game. The leadership in power is not accountable to their constituents right now. So we need to build movements and share the stories of those leaders on the ground, like Muhammad al-Kurd that I mentioned, or the Parent Circle, all of these nonviolent human rights activists. This is a human rights issue. It's not a diplomacy issue. And through their leadership and through the amplification of their voices, we will be able to hold our leaders accountable, both for the benefit of Israelis and Palestinians long term. Palestinian human rights ultimately are Israeli human rights. Combating the scourge of anti-Semitism that we see historically does not happen effectively until we both realize we are on the same side of this movement. That's the opportunity. All of us on this call, we have that power right now. So go out, follow those nonviolent activists on the ground, and amplify their voices.
Thank you. Bart, your thoughts?
I agree very much with what Greg is saying. I think having worked on this for a long time, I think I believed initially that it was about bringing people together and seeing each other as human beings. But I really think now is very close to what Greg is saying. It's about leadership. It's about people actually, it's very difficult for a leader to transform from one thing to another and bring their people somewhere. And I do think it's a human rights issue as well. I think that's absolutely key. As much as diplomacy is critical, human rights are also the center of the conversation.
Thank you, JT. I'm going to give you the last word. And I just do want to mention that maybe there's another dimension to this show we can do down the road where we've got Rahm Emanuel, who may very well be the U.S. ambassador to Japan and has a lot of connections to this issue as well, interestingly. And we can, bring in that Japan and Israel and America and Palestine corner. But your final thoughts, JT.
My final thought is, just such an honor and a privilege to hear all of you talking, as Bart said, humbling and educational and fascinating, and echoing what everyone said, but ultimately just what what little I can add from the work of making this film, but also just my work as an artist, is that the more we talk in this country and even in the geopolitical sphere of like, what is Netanyahu doing? What is the PLO doing? What's Hamas doing? It is, off of what Greg said, it is what school children and parents and farmers and what they're doing and how those people sit and connect to each other across the divide, because that is how culture changes and culture leads politics.
Well, listen,
before you end the recording, Steve, you
yeah.
got to get the two creative gentlemen to commit. They may be, JT had the last word, but this better not be their last work. And I hope they stick with this issue. There's a lot of stories to tell. This conflict needs creative energy, so please don't move on to the next.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Scott. But I am going to bring this to a close. I want to thank all of our scholars and academics who are online with us, who shared questions, which I've been weaving into our conversation. Thank you so much. And I want to thank HBO for helping to support this today and the Association for Israel Studies, but particularly want to thank Yael Aronoff, professor at Michigan State University, Gregory KHALIL, co-founder of Telos, Scott LASENSKY, professor at the University of Maryland, and our two filmmakers, our creatives, as Scott just said, JT Rogers, the writer of Oslo, and BARTLETT SHER, the director of Oslo. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And we look forward to seeing what conversations Oslo provokes. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Real privilege.